The Bucks get a 10-point win over the Hornets to snap their 4-game win streak or losing streak. But all that anyone is going to remember from this day, February 5th, not the Bucks getting this win over the Hornets, not the fact it's the last day you can pay your rent. It's that Khris Middleton was traded. How do you move forward from the end of an era? We're going to give Khris his flowers after this.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What it do, y'all? Welcome to Locked On Bucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Camille Davis. Joining me is Frank Madden, longtime voice of the pod and founder of brewhoop.com. We appreciate you for tuning in and making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube and in newsletter form. Head over to lockedondaily.com to sign up for the Locked On Bucks newsletter, coming to your inbox daily with Bucks news and league coverage free for you. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there is no better way to make every play more exciting than FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you will score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Now, Frank, there are some positives from tonight's 112-102 victory, especially given the trade activity this morning and Giannis being a late scratch. Like I mentioned in the open, really needed this win after the recent losing streak here. Bucks snapped a 4-game skid. Dame had a first half double-double. Thought he did a fantastic job driving, spraying out to his teammates, setting them up for really good looks. And Bobby Portis, he returned after missing the last 6 games due to a death in his family. And Bobby's return was needed. He gave the Bucks a lot of what they were missing with the rebounding. Finished tonight with 17 rebounds in addition to 23 points. 5 assists, a solid game for Bobby and his return back. Overall, really a professional win for this Bucks team, given everything that was going on around them. With Khris Middleton being traded, and Frank, I just want to start here. What was your initial reaction to the news that Khris Middleton was being traded? And as we record this, just for transparency's sake, news just broke from Shams that Jericho Sims is also going to be included into this trade somehow, but we're really more so focused on that Khris Middleton part right now. So, Frank, what was your initial reaction to seeing the news that the era of 22 in Milwaukee was coming to a close?
I mean, I think we weren't shocked. This was not, a Luka level out of the blue type trade. Obviously, there was lots of noise and smoke about a Kuzma specific deal happening really over the last, 24, 36 hours leading up to this. So I certainly was just sort of checking my phone in the morning, like waiting, okay, when is this actually going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think even going back, over the last few weeks, right? Obviously a lot of talk about the Bucks shopping packages and, different versions of Khris and Bobby, Pat Connaughton, right? Like what could the Bucks potentially get, putting any and all of those guys into various trade frameworks. So, obviously, like me, you, Justin, we've, I think, always been unabashed appreciators of what Khris Middleton has done on the floor, meant to this franchise, meant to this city and state. And this season, obviously, I mean, really, like, obviously there has been with Chris's, the games missed, the reduced minutes during the regular season, the last 2 seasons. And then this season, obviously, it's been even more pronounced. I mean, we've seen kind of the availability and, kind of his
lateral movement.
The lateral movement, we've seen obviously things kind of cresting downwards.
Yeah.
And it is so bizarre with him because, we say all that and we say all these things about like concerns about like, can he help you in the playoffs still and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like he's putting up the best true shooting percentage of his career right now. He's putting up a 51, 41, 85 slash line. He's averaging 20.7 assists, 6 rebounds per 36, which is, same as he put up last year when he was really efficient.
Mm-hmm.
The team's much better when he's on the floor versus off. Like, all the barometers that you can measure, and certainly like the 2-man game stuff when you see him on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And when he's been right, it's like just the touch and shot making and passing is all there. It's really just, to me, like the defense, obviously that has been the concern. And when he came back a year ago, the defense was a big concern too, and he got a lot better, I think, physically as last season went on. But the fact that he's been in these trade rumors, obviously, for a little while now, obviously indicates that some combination of the Bucks, not believing he can get to where they think they need him to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other big piece here, which is, the financial component of this,
Absolutely.
which is, the Bucks staring at, another season in the second apron. If they finish this season above the second apron, their 23rd draft pick gets frozen, and they'd have to be under it for the next, 3 out of 4, whatever it is, years
3 out of 4.
to unfreeze it. There start to be some consequences on top of the fact that you're paying just an astronomical luxury tax bill, right? And I give Bucks ownership a lot of credit in the sense that, like, we haven't had to talk about this, and we haven't had to talk about the team trying to save money for years, really. I mean, we
They've
go
been
back
going for
basically. Yeah, I mean, basically the PJ Tucker move was, we perceived them as like, oh, now they're going to get cheap, but they ended up spending on like everything they could essentially after that. You can go back to the Brogdon trade, right? That was kind of the last big one. Other than that, where it felt like, oh, the Bucks are kind of being cheap about this, but they have paid an absolute boatload in luxury taxes for years. And what have they had to show for it the last 2 years? Nothing. One playoff, a couple playoff wins basically, right? Or 3 playoff wins, I guess, technically, and 2 first-round exits. So it felt like really what this trade came down to was a reality check of, some combination of, we don't think Khris is getting us to where we need to be, which we'll talk about whether Kyle Kuzma is going to get the Bucks to where they need to be. Because certainly, like, by any metric, Khris Middleton is a much better basketball player right now than Kyle Kuzma.
Even with the 2 bad ankles.
And so it's this combination of, Chris's sort of theoretical and real decline and what they've seen, some projection from the Bucks about what that was going to mean for the future, the amount of money he was owed next season, $34 million, a presumptive opt into that player option, which obviously is not cheap, especially if, he's going to be a 6-man or something like that, if they don't think that he can get back to playing major minutes and being a starter. And obviously, saving money, right? $30 million of savings by making this trade, giving themselves some more flexibility over the next few years, right? Like, a lot of times, like, flexibility and cheapness can kind of be
two sides of
the same coin, depending on how you want to look at it. And I mean, like, again, I'm sure, the talking point is going to be, extending the runway of contention by adding a guy who's 4 years younger than Khris in Kyle Kuzma. But at the end of the day, I mean, how much you buy into sort of those various points and puts and takes, I think there's a profound sadness that a lot of us are feeling, because individually what Khris meant to this team and this franchise, right? And the fact that he was the second best player on a championship team, right? A concept that so many people questioned about him for so many years before July 20th, 2021, when he proved them wrong. And so I think to lose Khris, to see Khris leaving, and personally, I think seeing him go to Washington, like, sucks. Like, like, it sounds like he's probably going to stay there. I was really hoping he'd go someplace where he could actually, like, be on a winning team and play in the playoffs and, whatever. So that part hurts. But I think it's just, the reality check of sort of how these things end, right? And people that remember the Big 3 era of Big Dog, Ray Allen, and Sam Cassell know that that kind of tailed out really, really fast. And now obviously you look at, the kind of this version of this great Bucks team with Drew obviously being traded for Dame, which, it's like, you got Dame Lillard back, so, like, that obviously is understandable. But now with Khris feeling much more transactional, much more like giving up on Khris, that's really tough. And I gotta say, I was kind of like numb to it because I was expecting it, and I don't know, like, I've been following this team for so long, like, on some level, it's just like, okay, It had to happen at some point. But the thing that finally kind of really got me was Michael Redd had a
Oh, it was
fantastic
beautiful.
post about meeting Khris for the first time. The fact that those two guys will forever be bound by their jersey number 22. And I thought he had just a beautiful, tribute testament to who Khris is, what he's meant to this team,
Absolutely.
and the bond that they had. Which, like, after that happened, I cried a bit. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I read that and I was like,
That's
man,
real.
like it was a beautiful testament, and kind of got me thinking all the emotions that I felt on championship night. And I don't know if I've ever cried as much of happiness as I did in that last minute. Just this incredible just release of emotion
Yeah.
from 30 years of following this team. So yeah, I think the theme of this podcast, the theme of this, perhaps of this season, given we don't know what's else going to happen with it, is appreciation of certainly what Khris has meant to this team, and what he helped deliver. And again, as we've seen, right, with this frustrating version of the Bucks team, you just don't know how these things are going to last. You don't know when luck is going to break your way. And obviously, these last couple of years, I mean, the Bucks never did get another healthy playoff run with Giannis and Khris after that championship run, and that's just kind of sometimes the way it goes. But I think we can say we can kind of complain and wonder about what might have been. But for me, I'll just appreciate what was and what did happen, right? And the fact that we did, as a fan base, as Bucks fans, we did get to the top of the mountaintop, and we'll have that forever. So yeah, thank you to Khris Middleton. And
Absolutely.
Fortunately, there's no Washington Wizards game in Milwaukee the rest of the season. They do play in Washington, but whenever he does eventually come back to Milwaukee, I mean, man, I'm gonna look at plane flights, because
that's a game
that's a game I want to be at. Yeah.
A must attend. And I think you talking about just the emotion that was felt, I think that's such a real aspect of it. I did a quick bonus episode of the pod earlier today just to have something out there with the news that hit. And that was a similar theme that you saw throughout Bucks community, where it was just like, I feel so sad about this era coming to a close. And it makes me think of the quote from the finale of The Office when Andy was talking about, like, I wish somebody told me when I was still in the good old days so I could have appreciated it more. Like, you don't realize until you're out of them what the good old days are. And this is truly the end of an era. Like, yes, Giannis is still here. And as long as Giannis is wearing a Bucks jersey, the window is going to be open to a certain degree. But to see Giannis without his running mate that he's had during his entire time here in Milwaukee, like, they were the second longest tenured duo in the league behind Steph and Draymond. So to see that split, it really is the end of an era. And I want to talk a little bit about Khris's place in Bucks history, not arguing about where he stands, but just appreciating all that he helped to contribute to during this era of Bucks basketball right after this. Basketball season is heating up, and there is no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. It's the best place for daily fantasy sports, y'all. With over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, Prize Picks makes it easy and fun to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Here's how it works. You pick more or less than on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. You pair that with one more correct pick and you're going to cash out. Prize Picks keeps it simple. You can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds with their fast and secure withdrawals. You also get paid quickly. And y'all know I love to get paid. Plus, with Taco Tuesday promos, you get discounted player projections to even value more. Check out the promos tab to tell any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. If you tell a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. The everydayers know this is no surprise. Anybody who knows me knows how much I love Khris Middleton. When I think about it, Khris Middleton goes down as like my favorite Bucks player in history. It's not a discredit to Giannis because I have so much love for Giannis. Like, we watch Giannis grow up. But for me personally, I loved Khris Middleton. I'm a kid who grew up in the 90s watching Michael Jordan, so I have a certain affinity for the mid-range game. And the way that Khris was always able to get to it, how smooth his game was, I was drawn to that immediately. And when he was younger as well, the two-way aspect to his game, a really big fan of it, a really big fan of it. I make jokes about playing NBA 2K. My friends call me Camille Middleton on the game because I play a lot like Khris Middleton. But what he's done for the Bucks, like jersey in the rafters, arguably statue outside, although I did see on Bucks Reddit the suggestion for a fountain for Khris Middleton, because always moist, got to keep it going. But Khris is the first player in NBA history to go from the G League to the All-Star game, and he was an All-Star 3 times in that Bucks jersey. He's also an NBA champion, an Olympic champion, an NBA Cup champion. He is first in franchise history in threes. He's second in franchise history in games and minutes played. He's third in franchise history in points, assists. He's fifth in steals. He's seventh in rebounds. Khris Middleton came to this team unassuming in that Brandon Knight for Brandon Jennings trade, and he made quite the impact during his time here.
I mean, it's kind of crazy to think, like, I don't know, Camille, if you rewound the clock and thought back to where you were in, what was it? Was it July 2013 or
Yeah.
early July or mid-July 2013? I remember where I was when that trade happened. I was in a motel near San Diego, California on a work trip. And I remember, I can literally remember, looking at my phone, sitting on the bed in that room after the deal was announced. Of course, like, everybody thought of it as like the Brandon Knight, Brandon Jennings trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, if you watch Khris, it was interesting because, like, so and I remember the talk like, oh, well, Middleton was, a first round pick until he got his knee in Texas A&M. And it's like, you look back at like Chris's productivity and certainly like what he was like in college. It's like, I wouldn't have thought anything like this was possible. He didn't pass like he eventually passed. He didn't have the 3-point shot. He didn't shoot threes in college, basically, not very well. I think he was under 30% his last year in college. You never could have seen this coming, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's just crazy, if you had told us in 2013 that, this Greek kid and this guy that was the throw-in on the Brandon Jennings trade, those two guys are going to be, the foundations of this franchise for the next decade and bring a championship to Milwaukee. And, Giannis is going to be a multiple-time MVP and one of the 20 greatest players of all time. I mean, it would have been fantasy, like,
Truly,
like stupid, So it's funny to look back on the beginning of it and how none of this seemed preordained. None of this could have been predicted.
Mm-hmm.
And to think kind of bit by bit, it all built the battles that Giannis and, Khris had in the first year when they were competing against each other on that, awful 13-14 version of the Bucks, and then kind of their joint ascendance over the next few years and kind of just continued evolution into, what became this incredible pairing that, eventually delivered what, again, I never, growing up, I just never expected that the Bucks could actually win a championship in my lifetime. It just did not feel, like, of all the sports, right? Football, yeah, random teams, you make a run and you win a championship. Baseball, wild card teams win World Series, like, all that stuff happens. But in the NBA, you don't do what the Bucks did. Like, not a team like ours, Camille,
in
like,
a small market where no one wants to come play.
We don't get, Giannis. We don't have like this once in a lifetime player. We don't get those types of players, and then we don't find a multi-time, all-star like Khris, who's going to be the perfect running mate that, hit so many big shots. Like that doesn't happen to us as a fan base until it did. So yeah, I think again, like, you have limited room for nostalgia if you're a general manager, if you're a coach. But I think as fans, especially now that, the die has been cast here and, the move has been made, I think it's the perfect time for it. And, I watched The Sopranos for the first time. I'd never seen it, and I binge watched it over the probably like late 2024.
Mhm.
And, there's this line from Tony Soprano where it was, nostalgia is the lowest form of conversation, I think he
Yeah.
says. And whenever I have seen that comment, I always sort of shake my head because it's just like, yeah, maybe that's true for some people, whatever. But I think in sports, um, I think it's a beautiful thing. And
Mhm.
I think, hopefully our listeners will forgive us for engaging in some nostalgia. And, I think that championship will forever, bring a smile to my face and, kind of complete my journey as a fan. And
Mhm.
yeah, I think again, you just can't disentangle Khris Middleton from what we got to experience. Um, so yeah, I mean, as we try to do serious analysis of the trade,
We can do that
uh,
next segment.
it's always going to bleed. It's always going to bleed over into kind of that appreciation for him and that team.
It truly is. It is. That championship, as you mentioned, like I got to see the Packers win a championship when I was a kid. I got to see the Packers win another championship when I was in college back in 2011. And I remember celebrating that Packers Super Bowl, saying out loud, if the Bucks ever get one of these, like I was out on Water Street after they won it, crazy environment. And I just kept saying, if the Bucks win one of these, I cannot wait to experience that. And I had to wait 10 years to get that experience, but it's something special being from Milwaukee, like I am born and raised Milwaukee through and through, 414, no 262 area code right here. To
Sorry,
see,
sorry, I'm 262, but
hey, no
respect
disrespect.
respect to the 414.
But to see Milwaukee across the chest, to see that get a championship, to see how the city came together, it was a special moment. And I am so glad that Khris Middleton was part of that, along with Giannis, to see their come up together to get to that championship. It's a moment that's going to last in Bucks lore forever. And I'm so happy I got to experience that, especially with two guys who I got to see grow up with the franchise, struggle, go through tough playoff series, tough playoff losses, and finally get that dub. Like it's a really, really special feeling. And there's going to be a lot of time to be more in depth about what these moves mean. What does Kyle Kuzma bring to the team? But to end here, I want to just talk a little bit more about what the Bucks are going to lose from Khris Middleton and the questions that we might have about what they need to continue to go forward with this move being in process. It's still reportedly at the moment, they're still adding on to the trade, but feels like Khris is done in Milwaukee. So I do want to talk about what his absence will mean for the team going forward after this. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there is no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Because whether it's predicting that first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and then feel that thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's truly icing on the cake. So download the app or head to fanduel.com to get started. Bet just $5. And if you win, you will score $200 in bonus bets. That's fanduel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official sports partner of Super Bowl 59. Khris Middleton, a lot of people, you talked about nostalgia, and a lot of people think that those who were pro keeping Khris Middleton on the team were still stuck in 2021. And I constantly point to no, I'm stuck in 2024, seeing what he did on two bad ankles in the playoffs without Giannis, with Dame ailing, and just seeing how he stepped up in that situation. Like we know that he can step up in those playoff atmospheres. We know that he brings playmaking, the shot creation to this team. And without Khris, the Bucks have lost one of their better passers, primary second unit creator, a ball handler. And one could argue that they already needed another shot creator facilitator when Khris was still on the roster. But it's like, what do they do now? So when you think about Khris no longer being on this team and the hole that he creates on this roster, what do you point to as like, this is what they're going to miss most about 2025 version of Khris Middleton on this team?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very curious if they start Kuzma coming in from this trade, just because Kuzma to me is not a good fit with the starting group. I mean, I think he can play small forward in the abstract sense. He's kind of a hybrid 3-4. I think it's going to be interesting to see if he can maybe help unlock the small ball 5 Giannis lineups that, were kind of forced on the Bucks finally because of the injuries when Bobby was out and did not work at all, especially defensively. So I think he maybe can enable that. But, I think what we saw, Khris went to the bench maybe in part because of the defensive stuff, but I think more so because in general, one, he was minutes limited. And then, I think the thought was, well, if he's minutes limited, then we need to figure out how we make sure to get him touches while he is actually playing. And so that was easier to do when he was coming off the bench and not overlapping with both Giannis and Dame as much. And so, we've seen this the last couple of years. The oxygen with the starting 5 is very limited if you're not Giannis, Dame, or if you're not Giannis or Dame, right?
Period.
If you're a spot up shooter like Malik Beasley, okay, you can get some shots up because you're just spacing and you're getting kickouts and that's what you're doing. But Kyle Kuzma is not that. He's not a good spot up shooter. Never really has been. He's a streaky kind of scorer, 3-point shooter. Not to say he can't do cuts and get in transition and do things like that. Not like he needs to just get post touches and just go iso ball all the time. But I think that what you had with Khris was somebody that could just kind of seamlessly blend in with kind of any group. And I think it was so strange with those 2 scoreless games sandwiched around all 20-point games because he missed a couple of shots and then basically just froze him out of the offense. He just didn't get touches.
No touches, yeah.
Which was just kind of strange. And I don't know if there's something to read into that about Giannis and Dame not trusting him anymore or something like that. But I just don't get that because obviously, especially with Giannis, he's thrown so many perfect alley-oops and pocket passes to Giannis and made his life so much easier offensively. It's kind of hard to imagine that suddenly he wouldn't trust Khris as a decision maker. So I think just that, bench scoring, playmaking type option and malleability, I think is the obvious thing that you miss. And, I do think in a general sense, the Bucks are in less need of a big time scorer as their third banana now that they have Dame, as opposed to, Drew Holiday, during the championship run and the years thereafter. Which is why that was always sort of my hesitation, when there'd be talk about Jimmy Butler or Zach LaVine. It's can you actually get these guys the touches that would justify them
acquiring them,
paid $50 million or whatever in Jimmy's case, because as we've seen, right, look at Phoenix, right? Bradley Beal has been a 30-point per game scorer in this league. I don't think he would do that anymore, and even on another team, but he's been a 17, 18 point per game guy in Phoenix because he just can't get the ball enough playing with those 2 guys. And so I think as I was sort of thinking about it, I was well, if you're going to trade Khris, are you better off getting someone who's maybe a little bit lower volume, but just more well-rounded? Maybe you don't need to get a guy who's a big time scorer. I don't know that Kuzma is that.
I just want to knock down the open shots, and that might be challenging based on what we've seen. But my hope is that the gravity that Giannis and Dame create give him better looks than what he's been accustomed to make those shots easier for him to knock them down at a higher clip. But the raw numbers, even the advanced numbers for his shooting, just are not good.
Yeah, the more advanced you go, the worse they look. When you look at the on-off numbers, all the all-in-one stats, and basically even at his best with the Lakers, he was adequate.
League average.
He was never really good.
Right.
So yeah, I think again, the Bucks are gonna, that's the thing too. I don't know. At the end of the day, if John Horst was, taking a lie detector test, I don't know how much he would actually say that this is a financial move where they just sort of tried to get the best player they could while getting under the second apron and without having to give up, the 2031 first, which to me was
that was probably the biggest win. That
was probably the best news. Yeah, the best news I got today. And when I saw the pick swap, I was oh, maybe they went for a swap of the 2031 pick, which, obviously is dangerous because it kind of gives away the upside of that pick.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that that was, essentially a swap on the existing swap, and it's, not really like a net new pick out the door, and they get a second round in 2025 back. I was like, okay, well, that was at least somewhat of a relief,
Mm-hmm.
which
Agreed.
again feels kind of secondary because again, this is Khris Middleton for Kyle Kuzma is sort of the headline of it all. But yeah, so I'm just really interested to see like how they intend to use Kuzma. Do they feel obligated to start him because we just gave up Khris Middleton, and like we got to make it seem like we're excited about this guy. I don't know, right? Like it's a weird calculus because I don't think he's a very clean fit with that starting group,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he would probably be better coming off the bench. Doesn't mean he can't play like
Play
20,
with that starting
yeah,
group, but
or
just
28 to 30
optimizing.
minutes a game. Doesn't mean he can't close.
Yeah.
But I am just really curious to see like how do they actually intend to use him, and again, like say what you want about Khris Middleton, like all the numbers reflect a guy that was really helping this team win basketball
Mm-hmm.
games and outscore the other guys. And he made his shots and created lots of stuff for other guys. He had his lowest, turnover rate in like 7 years
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. So those are, big shoes to fill, and maybe they've got ankle braces in them and whatever else, but those shoes are not trivial to fill. And I think we are probably very justified in being skeptical of Kyle Kuzma's ability to do that, right? He's 29. He's not some young guy who's still got
Right.
some untapped potential. But again, I think a lot of it just comes down to, can he tap into whatever muscle memory he had from, 4 years ago when he was a champion, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's won a championship, which is
Yeah.
sort of this strange dichotomy of him being this kind of, negative, make you worse tank commander guy these last couple of years in Washington versus a guy that actually was important and helped a
Yeah.
team win a championship, right? When I pinged, two of my favorite basketball people, Daman Rangula, who's a huge Laker fan, and Andrew Sharp, who's a huge Wizards fan, and I was like, all right, guys, I'm in a group chat with them. Like, you guys are the people for me to ask because you've seen both sides of Kyle Kuzma. And Andrew was like, man, it sucked having to watch him play basketball the last couple of years. Whereas Daman was like, he's still like, he still has a soft spot for him because of what he did with the Lakers before he
Yeah.
was traded. So we'll see. Hopefully Kyle Kuzma can win over Bucks fans. I mean, it's not his fault he was traded for Khris. So
Exactly.
they're different types of players. I don't think we need to like compare them like for like, but at the end of the day, it's like, can he help this team win basketball games and become something resembling a contender? Because that's maybe my one weird silver lining to this, Camille, is like at least the people that always seemed intent on trying to blame Khris Middleton for the Bucks not winning enough or whatever, which again is stupid considering what he did in the playoffs, especially these last couple of years. But you're not going to have Khris Middleton to kick around anymore. You can't blame
No.
Khris Middleton when the Bucks, go out in the first round or whatever happens this year. So at least we won't have to fight those battles anymore, Camille. So hopefully that will make people maybe appreciate Khris Middleton a little bit more in hindsight. But again, we can worry about that on the jersey retirement day
Right.
a few years from now.
Absolutely. And as we wrap here, just two thoughts to what you said here. One, I do wonder if Kuz is inserted into the starting lineup, if him being in the starting lineup makes the Bucks take Andre Jackson Jr. out of that starting lineup and
Yeah.
insert AJ Green.
I don't think. I mean, the problem is like Kuzma is not a great defender either. He is long, right? He is like he's 6'9", he's bigger.
Size.
He has some athleticism. He'll at least rebound a little bit. Not that he's a great rebounder. But yeah, I think it's a great question because like then I think the question is like who goes out,
Mhm.
because he's not replacing Ajax's defense, and I've made the case in the past for why AJ Green, as you were saying, probably fits better, deserves to start. But part of that theory was, well, if you're going to have Taurean Prince be sort of just the 3-and-D small forward,
Mhm.
then having AJ, I think, made even more sense because he kind of was doing similar stuff. Now, if it's Kuz at the 3,
What does that look like?
what does that look like? But then you've got, literally 3 starters that are below average to bad shooters.
Yeah.
Or I need to give, and by the way, I need to give AH credit. I mean, he's at what, 38% still? Like,
Yeah.
he's been remarkably consistent as a 3-point shooter these 2 years. But obviously, he's not looking to take those shots, and he's wide
And
open
teams
when
aren't
he takes
really
them.
defending him for it either.
Exactly. He doesn't stretch the floor. The teams don't respect him. And I think he's been better, I think, of late in terms of actually like really trying to like flash to the middle and actually try to attack and get some layups here and there. So I give him credit. He's like trying to do more of that. But again, like, I mean, the numbers back it up. Like, he gums up the offense, and let's just say Kyle Kuzma is, not the offensive lubricant that would make it easier to play an Andre Jackson Jr. So yeah, I don't know exactly what that's going to mean, but we may find out as soon as Friday.
Yeah, let's be curious to see him. My last thought as we wrap here, I hope the best for Kyle Kuzma. Like, he's in the Bucks jersey. The skepticism that I've had over the move, like, I would love to be proved wrong, because ultimately want to see the Milwaukee Bucks succeed. So that'll do it for us here today. We will be back tomorrow. Justin will be on. We'll be talking some trade deadline moves after the deadline, looking to work to get something scheduled with.
By the way, Camille,
go ahead.
So we did hear, it sounds like it's Jericho Sims for Delon Wright has been added into the deal. So, and I would just want to say for the record, at 6:36 this evening, I didn't tweet. I messaged one of my group chats. I said, Jericho Sims for Delon Wright, LFG, because I saw something about Jericho Sims being on the block. And so I willed this trade into existence. It's a very insignificant trade. I wish I could have willed something better into existence, guys. I should have said, Khris Middleton doesn't get traded and something much better happens. But I'll take it. Delon Wright obviously wasn't really playing, and I hope Ryan Rollins' shoulder holds up and that they convert him, because now they really need to convert Ryan Rollins. That was one thing I didn't like, was that they didn't create a roster spot to.
I wonder if Pat Baldwin gets waived in the process of this for that roster spot for him.
The one thing is, though, I think based on what I've seen, that probably puts them over the second apron again. Unless they basically wait until like because the minimum is prorated during the season, so I'd have to check like what the prorated minimum is right now. But like I think they'd basically have to wait until like the very end of the season practically to be able to convert them. And I think there may be a deadline too. I'd have to check. I'd have to check what the deadline is for converting two-way guys and have them be able to be eligible for the playoffs. So that is a bit dicey, and I still think. I'm just curious if there may be another move coming that, again, especially with that 2025 second round pick that they acquired. And obviously they still have the 2031 first, which to me is a really valuable pick. So you better get something really good, a clear impact player if you move that. But you still have Bobby's contracts laying around. You can aggregate salaries now because you're under the second apron, just barely. So do keep an eye on that situation. I do kind of wonder, is there a way that they, figure out a way to dump, Marjon Beauchamp or Chris Livingston to a team that has, just an exception or whatever to absorb them, and then do they have to use a potentially good second round pick to do that? That wouldn't be great. But yeah, that would be one way of converting Ryan Rollins, which, again, say what you will about Ryan Rollins, like even if you don't think he's great,
he's useful.
He's your backup point guard right now. So if he's no longer eligible to play, in a month because of his two-way contract hitting its 50-game limit, like, okay, you're
gonna have to scramble for something else there. Then you can't.
I mean, if Dame's hurt, like, your playoffs are done anyway. So like, you don't need a lot of minutes from your backup point guard, but you do need somebody. And obviously Ryan's, I think, done a nice job in terms of being able to back up as well as play with, Dame and all these other guys. So, yeah, just one final note here. If people were looking for kind of Jericho Sims analysis, I'm pro getting Jericho Sims. He's probably not really going to play much, but he's basically, if you wanted athleticism, Ducks are like, all right, who's the most athletic? Who's the most athletic big man that like we can get without giving up much? Jericho Sims. Boom, hit the red Jericho Sims button. He will throw down some amazing dunks. I don't know if he'll do much else, but yeah.
I just like adding a fourth big into the rotation to be able to have a different option to throw out there for this team. So I'm here for it, especially if the cost was Delon Wright, somebody who wasn't in the rotation anyways. But for real this time, y'all, We're gonna wrap up. We're gonna get out of here.
I will say. I think
you make me look like a liar now, Frank.
I know. I will say. Well, I always do this, but I will say the one thing. I don't think Bobby Portis is getting traded.
I don't either.
It's not that Jericho Sims obviously replaces Bobby Portis in the rotation. I don't think Kyle Kuzma replaces Bobby Portis in the rotation because he's, again, more of a hybrid 3-4. I do think if they thought Jericho Sims could actually like give them spot minutes and stuff like that, maybe there's some version of the world. If they think that they can use Bobby Portis plus something to get like a more impactful player, I do wonder, could they convince themselves that Kuzma plus Sims situationally, basically, could that group of four, Giannis, Brook, Kuzma, Sims, right? Like, could you get, better coverage of your big minutes with that group of four rather than kind of what you have now, which again, now is going to include Kuzma's going to get some minutes at the four, right? And that's going to happen. So anyway, something to bear in mind. I mean, we aren't at the deadline. It feels like the deadline's passed, but it's
because we made such a big move.
We still have a little bit of time. So
yeah, we do. So again, we'll be back after the deadline wraps to recap what happened, how those moves affect the Bucks. Looking to get something on the tape with the Locked On Wizards host to get another perspective on Kyle Kuzma. So, like I like to say,
do we want that?
Listen, we got to keep it real, Frank. We got to know. We have to know what we're getting ourselves
into. Lakers, get our Laker friends on. Let's hear about Laker Kyle Kuzma. We're gonna ignore the last few years of Wizard Kyle Kuzma.
We need to know what he's been doing recently, Frank. I got some questions for Brandon over there, but that'll end it for us here today. Let us know how you're feeling in the comments about this move, if time has helped you digest it a little bit better. And as always, y'all, make sure you keep it locked in to Locked On Bucks, where we keep you covered with all your Milwaukee Bucks news going forward.